I see an orange light.
Good. Okay. Today is December 8th, 2014. My name is Edna Sussman. I'm a reference librarian here at the Half Hollow Hills Community Library in Dix Hills, New York. We're interviewing Robert Appel, a Korean War veteran, as part of our Veterans Testimonial Project and in collaboration with the Library of Congress's Veterans History Project. Thank you so much, Bob, for your service and for participating in our project. Thank you very much. Bob, where and when were you born?
I was born in the Bronx on December 26th, 1934.
And who were your parents, and what did they do?
Well, my mother's name was Bertha, my father's name was Nathan, and my father sold life insurance, and my mother stayed at home. Those were the days when moms didn't work.
And did you have any siblings?
Yes, I have a sister. She lives in Santa Fe, New Mexico.
And her name?
Iris.
Iris. And did she serve in the military?
No, she didn't.
Now, before you entered the service, what were you doing?
Well, I had graduated from high school in 1953, and I worked for a year, and then I entered the service.
And which branch of the military were you?
I was in the Army.
And did you enlist, or were you drafted?
I was drafted. They had a program where you could push your draft number up, which I did, and they drafted me.
What year was that?
That was in 1954. February 15th was the date in which I went into the service.
What happened when you departed for training camp and during your early days of training?
Well, I left from, I believe it was downtown New York somewhere. I don't recall exactly where, by bus, and they took me to Fort Dix, New Jersey, where you had about a week of orientation, and then I started, they gave me uniform, so on, barracks, and I started basic training. I don't remember the exact date, but roughly a week after I was drafted.
In Fort Dix, you
stayed? In Fort Dix, yes.
How long was the basic training?
Basic training was 8 weeks, and then you were given an assignment either to go into the infantry or some specialized area. I went into a specialized area, radio school, which was a 13-week course in which I learned Morse code, and I learned all of the symbols for the letters. In the Army, you don't say ABC, you say Abel, Baker, Charlie. In those days, those symbols, I believe, have been changed, although I remember A to Z, all of them.
Wow. Just so to clarify the letters, is that why they did that?
Yes. In other words, you wouldn't say Company A, you'd say Abel Company, Baker Company, Charlie Company, Dog Company, Easy, Fox, George, Howard, so on down the line. This I learned in radio school.
And it was always the same word for the letter?
Same word for the letter, yes.
Didn't know that.
All 26 of them had a symbol.
You say it's changed now?
Well, I think they still use symbols for but they're different symbols. It's not Abel, Baker, Charlie, Dog. It's different ones now. I believe. I could be wrong on that. This was a long time ago.
Do you recall your instructors, and if so, what were they like?
Well, I recall one man, Sergeant Concepcion, who was just returned from Korea, and he was in basic training. He was an officer. Not an officer. He was a non-commissioned officer who led my group in basic training. He's the only one I really recall. There were a couple of others. There was a Corporal Cleveland, but I don't remember much about him. So
this specialized training was what you learned while you were in the military, the Army then, you used it to?
Well, it was a 13-week course in which I learned Morse code and learned the basics about the radios that were used in those days. Of course, they're much more sophisticated today, and I don't believe the military uses Morse code anymore.
Oh.
I'm not sure. I could be wrong there, too. But everything is far more sophisticated, the electronics and so on. They taught us simple repairs of the radios, which you wore on your back, and they taught us sending and receiving Morse code in 5-letter blocks. And that was a 13-week course.
So the whole time you were in the service, this is what you did?
No.
Oh.
Okay. What happened was this. After the 13-week course, I was sent to Fort Belvoir. I believe it's still in existence in Virginia. It's south of, it was Falls Church, Arlington, and what's the third town?
Alexandria. No.
Alexandria, yes. It was south of Alexandria. I believe it's still there. It was the engineering center for the Army. That's where engineers were stationed. And it was the main unit there was the 79th Engineer Group, which I was assigned to. When I got there, they assigned me to the 79th Engineer Group. That was about 8 weeks, 13 weeks, 1 week orientation, 22 weeks after I was in. And they sent me to the motor pool and told me, you're going to become a truck driver. I said, I'm a radio operator. And he said, we know, but we need truck drivers. I said, I don't have a license and I never drove a car. And the officer said, perfect, we'll teach you our way. So I rolled my eyes and said, okay. And so I went down to the motor pool and they assigned me to a truck driver who'd been in the service for a considerable period of time. I don't remember his name. And he said to me, son, wash that truck. And that was my first experience. But this is the Army. These things happen all the time. So I started to wash the truck. Then I thought, this, if I could do something else that I'm qualified for, would be better. Obviously, they're not going to make me a radio operator. They should have, but they aren't. So what I did is I played the saxophone and clarinet in high school. And I found out, now this is the interesting part, I found out there were two bands on the post. The 75th Army Band and the 356th Army Band. The 75th was all African Americans. The 356th was white folks. Now a little background. In late 1949, Harry Truman issued an executive order integrating the armed services. Prior to that, they were segregated. I'm sure you're aware of that. And that process was still going on in early 1954.
The segregation.
The process of integration.
Oh, of integration.
And when I was assigned to the 356th, it was all white, and the 75th all black. When I got there about a week and a half later, the order came down to integrate both bands. And the way they did it was this. The bands each had about 38 members. They took about a half a dozen from each band and crisscrossed them, and from then on, people would be assigned at random to the band without regard to race. So I was one of the 6 people chosen to go to the black band because the people they chose were short-timers, they didn't want to lose their good players, and new people they didn't know, me. But so I went there, and they transferred 6 others, and it was a wonderful experience. I
Wait,
mean, a lot of...
Excuse me, did you go to someone and say, I want to join the band?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, I left that out. I went there, I wasn't supposed to leave the motor pool, but I did. And I went to the band and asked them, I play the saxophone and clarinet. I'd like to audition for the band. Right then and there, they auditioned me, and they said, we'll get you in. And I was in the following day, because I guess the band people had a pull with me. They sent papers down and got me in. And so I went to the other band, and just an interesting aside, of the 6 people who went, one of them became very famous. I don't know if you ever heard of him. You probably did. Hal Linden.
Of course.
Well, he played the saxophone also, and he played in Sammy Kaye's band prior to being in the Army.
Wow.
And he was a short-timer. So he's about 82 or 83 now. And he also was transferred with me and 4 others to the African American band. He was a very nice guy, by the way, very personable and very nice. He played Barney Miller, I think, was the program, a sitcom from many years ago. Plus he did things on Broadway. But anyhow, that was just an interesting aside. And when I left both bands in 1956, 2 years later, the bands were fully integrated, because people got out, new people came in, and they assigned people at random. And that I thought was kind of an interesting experience.
Mm-hmm. I'm a musician.
Yes.
So it's very interesting for me.
And on Saturdays, often we would go into Washington, D.C., the band would. And they would have different bands, either high school bands, college bands, military bands, on each corner. If there was a dignitary, a foreign president, prime minister, leader, general, driving by to see the president, and we would play.
Nice.
And that was just, it was not a long kind of thing. We would be there for maybe 20 minutes. They'd drive by and we'd get on the bus and go. But they did that. That was one of the things we did. We also had a dance band. And we played in the service clubs and officers' clubs, which was interesting, in the evenings. And that was a good thing because they'd give us compensatory time off. And so if we played on a Saturday, they'd give us Monday off, and I could leave, after we've done Saturday or Sunday morning and come back Tuesday morning, which was kind of nice. We did that on several occasions. I wasn't in Korea, although I'm a Korean War veteran because of the time I was in. And I was eligible for the Korean War GI Bill of Rights.
Now, the whole time you were in the band?
The whole time I was in, subsequent to my leaving Fort Dix, I was in the band, yes.
So if you had a military or a club engagement,
yes.
Other than those, what other types of playing did you do?
Well, we played parades. They would have parades on the post. They also had the Engineers Officer School there. And they would have a graduation about every 3 weeks, and we would play for that. And various events that they had on the military post, we would play for. I mean, they had parades often. And, where the soldiers in the 79th Engineer Group, which was the unit that was stationed there, would either march or their equipment, with their equipment, and we would play for that.
And other times you were rehearsing, probably.
Oh, we were practicing and rehearsing, yes, a lot of that. And
this was all in Virginia?
All in Virginia, south of Alexandria, Fort Belvoir. I believe it's still there, although I couldn't swear to it.
Okay. So you never used your Morse code training?
Never used it. Although I was pretty good at it. I believe in those days, in order to graduate, some people washed out because they just couldn't get the Morse code. You had to, take down as they're set, and you had to send it. And the minimum requirement to finish the 13 weeks was 15 words a minute. A word was considered 5 letters, and there were 5-letter units because it's code. And I was able to do 25 words a minute, which was pretty good. And so I didn't have any problem with that.
Sorry. How did you adapt to the military life, including the barracks and the food and the social life?
Well, you get used to it. It's not an ideal situation, but you're there with 35 or 40 other people. And we were in the old wooden barracks. Now they don't have them anymore. Almost like dormitories with 2 or 3 to a room. But we were in a long wooden barracks, with each person had a stall and a bed, and they were all lined up on both sides, and in the middle would be an aisle.
Wow.
And it was a bathroom for everybody downstairs, and that's the way it worked.
So it was a long building?
Yes.
How many people do you think lived there?
In our building, maybe 40.
Wow. Now, you served in Virginia,
yes.
not abroad.
No.
What kind of friendships and...
Well, I made some good friends. A couple of very fine musicians. One of whom I saw about 5 years ago in Philadelphia. His name was Tony Williams. He was a saxophone player, and he was very prominent in Philadelphia. He was a teacher, retired, and he plays all sorts of club dates, gigs, we call them in music.
Right.
And I saw him, and it was a very friendly and nice reunion.
When was that?
It was about 5 years ago, in the winter. We went to the Sheraton Hotel in Washington, Philadelphia. I believe it was the Sheraton, and where he was playing, and with his band. And we discussed old times, and it was a lot of fun. That's the only real contact I had since I got out.
Okay.
As I said, Hal Linden was there, but he left, and I never saw him again. But he was very friendly, very nice, and kind of a decent fellow.
How did you stay in touch with family and friends back home when you were in the military?
Well, I was so close. We would get a pass from the trains where a soldier would only pay one way. And I remember to this day taking a train from Washington, D.C. to New York. It was Grand Central Station. It was $9.10, and it
One
would have been
way.
$18, but $9.10 because I was a vet. And I do that just about every weekend.
Nice.
I take the subway up, and it was about a 4.5-hour trip, and it was fine. I'd sleep or read or do whatever I chose to do that you do on a train.
Did you take your instrument with you?
No. I would leave that.
What did you do for recreation when you were off duty?
Well, that's another very interesting story. There was, prior to my arriving there, a scandal in Fort Belvoir in the construction of facilities in which, now I may be a little off in this, you got to remember this is 58 years ago, in which Congress did an investigation because they made this post into what seemed like a luxury hotel. There were several swimming pools and golf courses and all sorts of stuff that other posts didn't have, and Congress was looking into why. Now, I don't know the outcome of the investigation. I just know that this was the case prior to my arriving. But we benefited from it because right behind our barracks was a swimming pool, which we used. Virginia can get kind of hot in the summer, which we used often. And
Very nice. Did you go into D.C. a lot too?
yes,
For
I
recreation?
went in with a friend. We saw shows, and we went. There's so many things to see. You had the Smithsonian and the National Gallery, and we saw shows that were. This friend of mine, who was kind of a cultured guy, he was a piano player. He played the glockenspiel that in the marching band. You can't play a piano in a marching band. But he took me to these places and introduced me to things which I knew existed but was not privy to in terms of dealing with. And we went to see, I remember one show we saw, The Bad Seed, before that you would see him in Washington, Philadelphia before they got to Broadway. And Patty McCormick was in it, and she was in, you know who she is.
I've heard the name.
And she was on Broadway, and it ran for a considerable period of time. They made a movie of it too, which she was in also. And that's just an aside. I would do things like that, and we'd go into Washington from time to time. And I'd stay on the post from time to time, and we'd rehearse in the mornings, and we'd have some free time in the afternoon. And about once a month, we'd have an inspection, they called it, where you'd have to make everything so tidy, and they would, if there was one little thing out of place, the officer who came through would berate you, and so on. But that's the Army.
That was once a month only?
Roughly. As I say, my memory doesn't serve me 100% correctly because it's been so long, but I remember that.
Did you have any issues with the inspection at any time? You were always fine?
Well, sometimes you have issues, and they make you do certain things you don't like to do, KP or something, but I didn't have major ones. I had a few minor ones. I mean, if the bed isn't made just so, we had a trunk, a footlocker, which if it wasn't set up according to the way they wanted it set up, and they would check. Sometimes they'd just walk through and walk out, and so other times they'd stop and check. Other times they'd check one person, at random, and that's the way it would be done.
Now, since you were in the band,
Yes.
excuse me, we haven't interviewed anyone from the music area
Okay.
yet. How does that work with your instrument? What if you needed a repair? Did the Army supply?
They had a man who was in charge of I don't know what you'd call it, of all the instruments. There was a room where many instruments were the military's instruments. Some people had their own instruments.
You had your own?
I had my own. I could have used theirs too, though, because they were instruments there. And in inclement weather, a lot of people would use theirs rather than, like if you had a clarinet, which is made of wood, they would use theirs. And
Did you play clarinet or sax?
both.
Oh, both.
Both. In the band, marching band, I played clarinet. And for the club dates, as we call them, when you play at the officers' club or at the NCO's club or for the
Functions.
soldiers, I would use my own.
And the sax.
And the sax mainly for those things.
Okay.
I stopped. I don't play anymore. I
don't?
quit.
Oh.
I teach my granddaughter and grandson.
To play?
Yeah,
Excellent.
he plays the saxophone, and she's in third grade. Second grade, excuse me. She plays the recorder, but she wants to play the clarinet.
Excellent.
So I will proceed to teach her when she's older.
That's wonderful. after the military, you said you didn't continue to play.
No, I did after
Oh,
the
you
military.
did?
It's just in the last 15 years I haven't played.
Oh,
I
I
played,
see.
I taught music more than played up through about 1985. I taught private
Privately.
lessons. Yeah. And then in 1985 I quit, and I haven't played since. The only private teaching I do is with my grandson and my granddaughter.
You still have your instruments?
Well, my son has my tenor saxophone, and my clarinet's around somewhere.
Now, how were you received when you were dismissed? You were finished with your service by family and.
Oh, I would see my
Friends.
family all the time. I would come home. You see, I wasn't stationed in some far-off
Right.
land, like Germany or Korea or Japan. I was stationed 220 miles from home. So every weekend, just about, with a few exceptions, I would go home.
And when you were finished with your military service,
Okay,
how was that with
that was fine.
family and friends?
Very good.
Yeah.
You know,
How did you readjust to civilian life?
it was not a problem at all.
What did you do then after?
Well, I got out February 1956, and I worked for about 6 months, and then I went to college on the Korean War GI Bill,
Oh, where?
which was a very, very fortunate. I mean, I went to music school. I started at a music school, SUNY Fredonia. You've
Sure.
heard of it.
Oh, absolutely.
And the GI Bill, I have to say this, which is, it was free when I went there, SUNY school. It was just a $50 registration fee, and you had to buy books, but the school itself was free, and you had to pay for living expenses.
For veterans or for
For
everybody?
everybody.
Oh.
That was the first year I was there, but the second year, Rockefeller, I believe, no, Harriman was, in the second year, was the governor, and they instituted a fee. You know, I think it was a couple of $100 a semester. But we were grandfathered in, so I never paid anything. And then naturally, now it's thousands of dollars. You know. But it was started the year after I started Fredonia. And I graduated, and I had switched from music to elementary education, and I graduated. I went an extra year for that reason. And I graduated in when did I start? 56. I graduated in 1961 and got a job teaching, which I did for 29 years until I retired.
Where?
North Babylon,
In a what level school?
elementary school, 4th, 5th, and 6th grades.
Music.
No, I
Oh.
switched from music to elementary education.
Oh, I see. Wonderful. Now, have you remained in contact with any veterans? You said no.
Just that one that I saw, Tony Williams, in Philadelphia about 6 years ago. Other than that, no. They were, they're from all over the country, and when I spoke to him, I learned that many of them had died, and since then I know of one who died because I read about him. He was a pretty prominent teacher in Washington D.C. He was a very nice guy. His name was Calvin Jones, just as I remember him. But many, a lot of them were older than me, so those who were still alive were well into their 80s, and many have died.
Now, how do you feel your wartime, your military service experiences affected your life?
Well, they affected it positively because the GI Bill has been such a boon for me. I got, as I said, I received $110 a month for the time I was in college, and I had no costs other than living costs, and that paid them in those days. It was enough.
Wow.
Because I had no tuition costs. I had a $50 registration fee, and that was that. It was like having a scholarship, and that was good. And another interesting aside is when I got out of the service, I had life insurance. You had a $10,000 life insurance policy.
Through the military?
Through the military, which I was ready to cancel. Because what did I know about life insurance? I was 21 years old. I was going to live forever. And my father, who sold life insurance, said, "We're keeping that policy. I'll pay for it." He says, "It's the best life insurance from a cost basis you can get, far cheaper than commercial life insurance. Now, you may not like it now or need it, but at some point you wish you had it." And he paid for it the first few years. And I remember, and I'm still paying for it now, $26 every 3 months. So it's $104 a year for $10,000. And we converted it from term insurance to regular life. And the beauty of this is not so much that I have it, but what it's done for me in terms of saving money. I get, if you're a veteran, you get an exemption on your property taxes for monies you received from the military. I got an exemption for the $4,000+ I received, $110 a month to go to college, and every year I would get a dividend from this insurance, which I take to the Huntington Town Hall, and they would reduce my assessment on everything with the exception of schools and library.
Wow,
And
that's
that
great.
has saved me, that I still pay the $104 a year, but the savings on my taxes from that item alone is over $3,000 a year.
Wow.
So, plus I get dividends from the insurance, which are north of $400 a year, all because my father told me to keep it.
Very nice.
And I talked to other veterans, and I said, I kept that. And they all say the same thing. I should have kept it too.
Very smart. Your dad was very
Yes,
smart.
he knew.
What are some life lessons you learned from military
Well, you learn
service?
discipline, and you have to follow orders. Sometimes you didn't like it, but discipline and following orders is part of military service, because you couldn't have chaos and run an army or any branch of the service. That in particular, and I made some good friends there, although I did lose contact with just about all of them, with that one exception after I left. And all in all, looking back, at the time I may not have thought so, but I think it was a very good experience for me.
How has your military service impacted your feelings about war and the military in general?
Well, okay, now we're getting into the political aspect of
Yeah.
things, and I didn't think about that coming here, but gee, I don't know how to answer that without giving it some serious thought.
Sure.
Because I do have thoughts about that. You
Okay.
know.
What about your feelings towards the military in general today?
Well, it's obviously a necessity. You can't not have a military, especially with our place in the world. Sometimes the way we use it may not be to the best advantage, according to my point of view. But of course, that's a political issue, which we could talk about for hours on end at some point.
Now, is there anything you did while you were in the service that you might have regretted?
Well, not offhand, can't think of anything offhand that I did that I might have regretted. I would have liked to maybe stayed in the Morse code area, because I found that very interesting, but the Army is not the most efficient place. I mean, they trained me as a radio operator, and they trained me in sending and receiving Morse code, and they sent me to a place and wanted to make a truck driver out of me. Didn't make sense, but that's the Army.
That is odd. I mean, they must have had openings for Morse code
Well,
radio operators.
I didn't. You don't ask questions, first of all,
Oh.
especially when you're 19 years old and some officer is talking to you. You just do what you're told, and that's.
But they were okay when you went to go audition for the band.
They didn't mind it. I spent 1 or 2 nights in the 79th Engineer Group barracks. They called me in. Appel, you've been transferred to the band. It was as simple as that.
Nice.
And I breathed a sigh of relief and thank you very much. And
Now, it might have been possible as a radio or a truck driver that you might have been sent abroad.
it would have been very possible.
Yeah.
But I don't know what happened. I was in a unit, as I told you, it was called the 79th Engineer Group. Excuse me, they were construction engineers in contrast to combat engineers who work under fire. Construction engineers build and repair roads and bridges, and they're not near areas of combat, usually.
Oh, so,
And it would have been academic because the Korean War had ended by then, and
Right.
there was no war going on. But I really don't know what the outcome was or what happened. I know they were there for several months, and I don't. They could have been transferred overseas, because in those days they transferred whole units overseas.
So by then it was peacetime
Yes,
already.
it was peacetime, and they were decreasing the size of the army because the Korean War had ended, and people, were being discharged and not being replaced.
Did you have the option to re-up after?
Well, yes, I did.
Oh, you did?
I chose not to. I chose to leave after 2 years.
Okay.
I served 2 years to the day, by the way.
Really?
Yes, I put the dates on that form, February 15th, 54 to February 14th, 56.
What message would you like to leave for future generations who will view or hear this interview?
Well, it's just a part of history, and I hope some people are interested in hearing about my rather mundane military experiences.
Oh, not at all.
And I hope it adds something to their sense of their feeling for history. As I was a late Korean War entry veteran, but I got all of the benefits of the Korean War, which served me very, very well, and I have no regrets about it, none whatsoever.
Great. Is there anything you feel we have not discussed or should be added to our
Well, we've
interview?
discussed most everything that I could think of. As I said, my experience was not a bad one at all. At the time, I felt, I'm glad it's over.
Oh, you did?
Sure, yeah.
Why is that?
Well, 2 years I was away from home. I was young. I was 21 when I left. I was 19 when I went in, just 19. And
That was right out of high school, pretty much.
that was right after well, I got out of high school, and the ending, they had, in those days in high school, they'd have graduations every 6 months in the city. And I got out in the end of January 1953. I went into the service in February 54, 1 year out of high school.
Okay. During that 1 year,
I worked.
you worked?
I worked for a bank.
Oh, okay. I missed that. I didn't. Okay. Anything else we should cover? You're good?
Well, I've covered most everything that...
That was very interesting, different angle that we've haven't
Is it?
had so far.
Okay.
Absolutely. Thank
Well,
you
it
so
adds
much.
to the...
Yep.
Well, it was my pleasure to do this, and if
Thank
you want me at any other time, if there are any questions, don't hesitate to call. I live close by, and
I appreciate that. Thank you so
Thank
very
you.
much.